First contact gone wrong. Commander Centaur stood on the bridge of the Valdarian scout ship Eternal Glory, watching the third planet of this unremarkable star system through the main viewer. The blue marble spun slowly before him, white clouds swirling across continents that showed clear signs of industrial civilization. After 3,000 years of expanding across the galaxy, first contact procedures had become routine for the Valdarian Empire. The species called themselves humans, according to their primitive radio transmissions. Centaur's scaled fingers drummed against his command chair as he reviewed the initial scans. Chemical rockets, basic satellites, and metal ships that barely qualified as interplanetary craft. This would be another simple addition to the Empire's 400 controlled star systems. "Commander," called out Senior Analyst Mordun from his station, "we're detecting some unusual readings from their orbital installations." "Define unusual," Centaur replied, his reptilian features remaining calm. In his 8 centuries of service, few things truly surprised him anymore. "Sir, the humans appear to be collecting space debris. Large amounts of it. Our sensors show massive accumulations of scrap metal, broken satellites, and what appears to be asteroid fragments being gathered near their moon." Centaur's forked tongue flicked out briefly, a sign of mild interest, probably attempting to clear their orbital paths. Primitive species often create debris fields before learning proper space navigation. The communication officer, a young Valdarian named Kesselin, turned from her console with excitement. "Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the planet. They want to talk." "Put it through," Centaur ordered, settling back in his chair. This was always his favorite part, the moment when a new species realized they were no longer alone in the universe. The viewer flickered and showed a human female with dark hair tied back and wearing what appeared to be a uniform covered in grease stains. Behind her, Centaur could see a chaotic workspace filled with tools, sparking machinery, and what looked like ship components scattered everywhere. "Hello there," the human said with a smile that seemed both friendly and slightly mischievous. "I'm Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Cooperative. Nice ships you've got there. Very shiny." Centaur straightened in his chair. Most species either cowered in fear or demanded to know their intentions during first contact. This casual greeting was unexpected. "I am Commander Centaur of the Valdarian Empire," he announced formally. "We come representing the greatest civilization in this galaxy. Your species has been selected for evaluation." Captain Chen raised an eyebrow. "Evaluation? That sounds ominous. Are we passing or failing so far?" "Your technology appears to be in its infancy," Centaur replied, allowing a hint of condescension to enter his voice. "However, your species shows potential. The Empire offers protection and advancement to worlds that prove worthy of our guidance." "That's very generous," Sarah said, though her tone suggested she found something amusing. "Tell me, Commander, what do you think of our ships?" Centaur glanced at Mordun, who quickly pulled up scans of human vessels. The display showed exactly what he expected: crude metal constructions using primitive fusion drives and basic life support systems. "Your ships are adequate for a developing species," Centaur said diplomatically. "With Imperial guidance, your people could learn to build proper starships within a few centuries." Sarah's smile widened. "Would you like to see our latest design? We just finished her yesterday." Before Centaur could respond, his sensors officer called out in alarm. "Commander, massive object approaching from behind the moon." The main viewer automatically shifted to show what was emerging from lunar shadow. Centaur's jaw dropped open, his reptilian eyes widening in disbelief. The thing approaching them couldn't be called a ship by any rational definition. It appeared to be constructed entirely from space debris. Twisted metal plates welded together at impossible angles, sections of destroyed satellites somehow integrated into the hull, and what looked like an entire asteroid serving as the central structure. Pipes and cables ran along the outside of the vessel in chaotic patterns, and several sections seemed to be held together with nothing more than metallic tape and determination. "By the seven suns," whispered Mordun. "What is that abomination?" "That," Sarah Chen announced proudly from the communication screen, "is the lucky junk. She's not much to look at, but she flies like a dream." As if to prove her point, the impossible vessel suddenly accelerated at speeds that should have torn it apart. It spun through a series of maneuvers that violated everything Centaur knew about physics and engineering, coming to a stop directly beside the eternal glory with precision that would have impressed the Empire's best pilots. "Impossible," Centaur breathed. "That collection of scrap metal cannot achieve those speeds. The structural integrity alone should have." "Should have what?" Sarah interrupted, her image flickering as the lucky junk moved closer. "Fallen apart." "Yeah, we get that a lot. Thing is, Commander, we humans have a different approach to engineering." The scanner operator, his scales pale with shock, reported readings that made no sense. "Sir, the human vessel shows power outputs 3 times higher than it should be capable of generating. The hull stress readings are completely impossible. According to our instruments, that ship should have disintegrated the moment it tried to move." Sarah laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be both cheerful and slightly unsettling. "We call it aggressive improvisation. See, when you don't have fancy technology or unlimited resources, you learn to make things work with whatever you can find. That's how humans do engineering." Centaur found his voice again. "But your ship, it defies all known principles of construction. How does it maintain structural integrity?" "Honestly, we're not entirely sure," Sarah admitted with a shrug. "My chief engineer, Marcus, says it's held together by spite and good intentions. But hey, it works, right?" The communication screen split, showing another human, a massive man with a beard that looked like it belonged in a mining operation. He was covered in even more grease than Sarah and appeared to be actively welding something while talking. "Captain's being modest," the man said without looking up from his work. "The lucky junk is a masterpiece of adaptive engineering. Every system adjusts in real time based on performance needs. The hull actually strengthens under stress by redistributing load through the debris matrix." "That's impossible," Mordun protested. "Materials science doesn't work that way." Marcus finally looked up, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Materials science according to who?" "Your textbooks. We threw those out the airlock years ago. When you're building ships from asteroid slag and satellite scraps, you develop new rules pretty quickly." Centaur's mind reeled. The Valdarian Empire had spent 3 millennia perfecting ship design, using proven engineering principles passed down through generations. Every vessel was built to exact specifications using materials tested over centuries. The idea of creating functional starships from random debris was not just impossible, it was insane. "Your construction methods," he managed to say, "they must have a tremendous failure rate." Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances and burst into laughter. "Failure rate." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. "Commander, when you're building ships from garbage, everything is already a failure until you make it work. That's the beauty of it. We start with the assumption that nothing should function, so when it does, it's like magic." "Plus," Marcus added, returning to his welding, "when something breaks, we just grab more junk and fix it. Can't do that with your fancy precision-built ships, can you? What happens when one of your perfect components fails in deep space?" The question hit Centaur like a physical blow. Valdarian ships were indeed marvels of engineering, but they required specific replacement parts manufactured in orbital facilities. When something broke far from Imperial space, it often meant the difference between life and death. "Our ships rarely fail," he said weakly. "But when they do," Sarah pressed. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. "Would you like to see inside the lucky junk?" Sarah offered. "I promise she's even more impossible on the inside." Against every instinct screaming in his head, Centaur found himself nodding. Within an hour, he stood in the docking bay of the human vessel, his environmental suit barely containing his shock at what he was seeing. The interior of the ship was a maze of interconnected spaces carved out of asteroid rock and lined with metal plating that clearly came from a dozen different sources. Pipes ran along the ceiling in patterns that seemed random but somehow worked. Machinery hummed and sparked with energy that flowed through systems no Valdarian engineer would ever approve. "Welcome aboard," Sarah said, now wearing a tool belt that looked like it could repair anything in the galaxy. "Fair warning, the gravity generators are a bit temperamental. We built them from parts salvaged from 3 different crashed ships." As if summoned by her words, the gravity suddenly shifted, causing Centaur to stumble. Instead of panicking, the human crew simply adjusted their movements naturally, as if working in unstable gravity was perfectly normal. "How do you live like this?" Centaur asked, grabbing a pipe for support. "You adapt," Sarah replied simply. "That's what humans do. We adapt to whatever situation we're in and make it work. Your empire probably has safety protocols and backup systems for everything, right?" "Of course. Proper engineering requires redundancy and fail-safes." "See, that's where we differ," Marcus called from somewhere deeper in the ship. "We don't build backup systems. We build systems that can't fail because they're already broken and working anyway." The tour continued through sections that defied every principle of ship design Centaur had ever learned. The engine room was a cathedral of jury-rigged machinery that somehow produced more power than engines 10 times its size. The life support systems were cobbled together from atmospheric processors, aquarium filters, and what appeared to be a hydroponics garden that served multiple functions. But it was the bridge that truly broke Centaur's understanding of reality. The command center looked like someone had taken components from 50 different ship types and somehow made them work together. Screens flickered with information displayed in ways no Valdarian system would ever present data, and the control panels seemed to change configuration based on what tasks needed to be performed. "This is our navigation system," Sarah explained, patting a console that appeared to be held together with metal tape. "It integrates data from sensors we've scavenged, communication arrays we've repurposed, and stellar cartography equipment we've creatively acquired. It's a mess," Centaur said honestly. "It's beautiful," Sarah corrected. "Every component tells a story." "This sensor array came from a derelict probe we found drifting near Jupiter. That processing unit was salvaged from a crashed satellite. The display screens were actually taken from old entertainment systems. Together, they give us navigation accuracy that rivals anything your empire builds." To prove her point, Sarah activated the system. The screens lit up with a 3-dimensional map of local space that was more detailed and accurate than anything on the Eternal Glory. The human chip's sensors had detected gravitational anomalies, micro-asteroid fields, and spatial distortions that Valdarian equipment had completely missed. "Impossible," Centaur whispered for what felt like the 100th time that day. "There's that word again," Sarah smiled. "Commander, I'm starting to think your empire has gotten comfortable with impossible. You've built everything according to the same rules for so long that you've forgotten how to innovate." The communication console chirped, and Marcus appeared on screen from the engine room. "Captain, we've got company incoming. Looks like 3 more Valdarian ships just dropped out of hyperspace." Sarah's expression grew serious. "What class?" "Heavy cruisers, by the look of them. They're moving into attack formation." Centaur activated his own communication device. "This is Commander Centaur to approaching vessels. Stand down immediately. I am conducting first contact protocols." The response came quickly from his superior, Admiral Vokhtar. "Commander, remove yourself from that debris field immediately. We've detected weapons signatures from the human constructions." "Sir, these aren't weapons platforms. They're actual starships built by." "Commander, you will withdraw to a safe distance while we conduct proper reconnaissance. These primitive constructions pose no threat to Imperial vessels." The channel closed, leaving Centaur staring at Sarah, who had listened to the entire exchange. "Your admiral seems confident," she observed. "Imperial doctrine," Centaur explained weakly. 3 heavy cruisers can pacify most threats we encounter. Sarah's smile returned, but this time it held an edge that made Centaur's scales prickle with unease. Marcus, she called to the engine room, fire up the emergency beacon. The emergency beacon. Marcus's voice carried a note of excitement. Oh, this is going to be fun. Through the bridge windows, Centaur watched in growing horror as lights began flickering throughout the asteroid belt surrounding Earth's moon. What he had assumed was collected space debris suddenly revealed itself to be dozens upon dozens of ships. Each one was as impossible as the Lucky Junk, built from scrap and salvage, held together by human stubbornness and engineering that laughed at the laws of physics. Admiral Vokhtar, Sarah said into the open communication channel, "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Cooperative. Your commander here was just admiring our shipbuilding techniques. Would you like a demonstration?" The 3 Veldarian heavy cruisers, each a kilometer long and armed with weapons that could crack planets, suddenly found themselves surrounded by a fleet of impossible human vessels that shouldn't exist, shouldn't fly, and definitely shouldn't be capable of the maneuvers they were now performing. Centaur closed his eyes and wondered if his career in first contact was about to come to a very sudden end. When physics meets human stubbornness, Chief Engineer Korvash had seen many impossible things in his 12 centuries of service to the Valdarian Empire. He had witnessed stars collapse into black holes, watched entire planets get reshaped by geological engineering, and observed the birth of artificial solar systems. Nothing, however, had prepared him for what he was currently staring at through the observation port of his mobile laboratory ship. The human vessel designated Workshop 7 hung in space before him like a mechanical nightmare. It appeared to be constructed from the hull of an old transport ship that had been cut in half, welded to what looked like an asteroid mining platform, and then covered with so many additional components and modifications that its original shape was completely unrecognizable. Pipes, cables, and mechanical appendages jutted out at random intervals, giving it the appearance of a metallic spider that had gotten into a fight with a scrapyard. "Sir," his assistant, Junior Engineer Peldak, called from the scanning station, "I'm reading power fluctuations that shouldn't be possible. The energy output is varying by 300% every few seconds, but somehow the ship maintains perfect stability." Korvash's 4 arms gestured in frustrated confusion. "Run the scans again. Those readings must be in error. I've run them 17 times, sir. The results are consistent. That human ship is generating more power than our largest battle cruisers, using what appears to be a fusion reactor built from components salvaged from at least 12 different vessel types." The communication screen activated, showing a human female with short gray hair and wearing coveralls that looked like they had survived several explosions. Her hands were covered in some kind of black substance, and she appeared to be eating something while talking. "Morning," the human said cheerfully, taking another bite of whatever she was consuming. "I'm Chief Engineer Rosa Martinez. You must be the Valdarian tech team Admiral Vokhtar mentioned. Welcome to our little workshop." Korvash straightened his elongated frame and activated his translation device. "I am Chief Engineer Korvash of the Imperial Science Division. I have been tasked with understanding your construction methods." Rosa laughed, a sound that seemed to echo strangely through her ship's communication system. "Construction methods. That's a fancy way of saying, how the hell does this junk fly, isn't it? Your vessels appear to violate several fundamental principles of engineering," Korvash replied carefully. "I am here to learn how you achieve functionality with such unconventional designs." "Fair enough," Rosa said, wiping her hands on a rag that looked even dirtier than her coveralls. "Want to come aboard? Fair warning, though. We're in the middle of rebuilding the gravity generators, so you might want to mag-boot to something solid." An hour later, Korvash found himself floating inside what could only be described as organized chaos. The interior of Workshop 7 defied every safety regulation the Empire had developed over 3 millennia. Exposed power conduits ran along walls that weren't quite straight, machinery hummed, and sparked in spaces that seemed too small to contain it, and human engineers moved through the maze-like interior with casual confidence that suggested they found nothing unusual about working in what appeared to be a controlled disaster. "So," Rosa said, pulling herself along a guide cable while munching on what she called a protein bar, "what do you want to see first? The engine room, the fabrication bay, or the parts graveyard?" "Parts graveyard," Corvash asked, his translator struggling with the unfamiliar term. "That's what we call the storage section, where we keep all the broken stuff we haven't figured out how to use yet," Rosa explained. "One person's irreparable junk is another person's spare parts, you know." They floated through a section where 3 human engineers were working on what appeared to be a sensor array built entirely from components that clearly weren't designed to work together. A young man with cybernetic implants replacing his left arm was welding connections between a Valdarian communication relay and what looked like an entertainment system display screen. "Hey Tommy," Rosa called to the cyborg. "How's the integration coming?" "Almost got it," Tommy replied without looking up from his work. "The Valdarian relay processes data about 50 times faster than our old systems, but the display can't keep up. So I'm building a buffer system from 3 old gaming computers and a navigation processor I pulled from a cargo hauler." Corvash's head spines flattened against his skull in distress. "You cannot integrate a communication relay with entertainment equipment. The power requirements alone would cause catastrophic feedback." Tommy paused in his welding and looked at Corvash with confusion. "Catastrophic feedback? You mean like this?" He activated the system, and the display immediately began showing a 3-dimensional map of local space with detail that exceeded anything Corvash had seen outside of Imperial command centers. That's impossible," Corvash stammered. "The signal processing algorithms aren't compatible. The data formatting should cause system crashes." "Oh, it did at first," Tommy admitted cheerfully. "Crashed about 40 times before I figured out how to make the gaming computers translate the data streams. Turns out graphic processing units are really good at handling multiple data feeds simultaneously." "Who knew?" Rosa patted Corvash on one of his shoulders with what seemed to be sympathy. "I can see you're having some trouble with our methods. Let me ask you something. How do Valdarian engineers solve problems?" "We analyze the problem thoroughly, consult established engineering protocols, design a solution using approved components, test the design extensively, and then implement the solution following safety procedures," Corvash recited automatically. "And how long does that process usually take?" "For a project like this sensor integration, perhaps 6 months to a year, depending on the complexity." Tommy looked up from his work with amazement. 6 months? I've been working on this for 3 days. But your solution is untested, unproven. It could fail at any moment." "Sure it could," Rosa agreed. "So could your solution, once it's finally built. The difference is, if Tommy's system fails, he'll figure out why and fix it. Probably make it better in the process. How do you fix a system that took a year to design when it breaks down in deep space?" The question hung in the zero-gravity air like an accusation. Corvash had never considered the problem from that angle. Imperial ships were designed to be so reliable that failures were theoretically impossible, but when they did occur, "We carry replacement components manufactured to exact specifications," he said weakly. "And when you run out of replacement components." The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Their tour continued through sections that challenged everything Corvash thought he knew about engineering. The engine room was a cathedral of machinery that seemed to grow organically from the ship's structure. Fusion reactors built from salvaged components generated power through processes that should have been unstable, but somehow maintained perfect efficiency. Cooling systems used repurposed atmospheric processors and what appeared to be modified beverage dispensers to maintain optimal temperatures. "This is our main power plant," Rosa announced, gesturing to a reactor assembly that looked like it had been built by someone who had never seen a proper fusion reactor but had been given a rough description by a drunk engineer. We called her Frankenstein's monster because she's made from parts of about 20 different power systems. The containment field geometry is completely wrong, Corvash protested, studying the reactor with growing alarm. The plasma flow patterns should cause cascade failures. Should, yeah, agreed a voice from above them. Corvash looked up to see a human woman hanging upside down from the ceiling, apparently adjusting something in the reactor's control systems. I'm Engineer Patricia Kim, and I've been babysitting Frankenstein for 2 years now. She's got personality. This one. Personality. Corvash's translator seemed to be struggling with the concept. She runs hot when she's stressed, gets cranky when the fuel mixture isn't quite right, and sometimes decides to generate 20% more power than she should just because she feels like it. Patricia explained, dropping down to join them with casual disregard for safety protocols. But she's never let us down when we needed her. You speak of the reactor as if it were alive, Corvash observed. Isn't she? Patricia asked seriously. I mean, she responds to changes in her environment, adapts her performance based on demands, and even seems to learn from experience. Last month, she figured out how to optimize her own fuel consumption without any input from us. The implications of that statement made Corvash's head spin. Imperial reactors followed precise operational parameters programmed during construction. The idea of a reactor that could modify its own performance was terrifying. But how do you maintain quality control? How do you ensure consistent performance? Rosa and Patricia exchanged glances and burst into laughter. Quality control. Rosa gasped between laughs. Consistent performance. Corvash, my friend, I think you're missing the point of human engineering. We don't want consistent performance, Patricia added, wiping tears from her eyes. Consistent performance means you're not adapting to changing conditions. Our ships get better over time because they learn from every situation they encounter. To demonstrate, Patricia activated a control interface that looked like it had been cobbled together from gaming equipment and medical monitoring devices. The main display showed real-time performance data from throughout the ship, but instead of static readings, the numbers were constantly fluctuating as systems adjusted to optimize efficiency. Watch this, Patricia said, deliberately overloading one of the power distribution nodes. Instead of causing a cascade failure, as Corvash expected, the ship's systems immediately began rerouting power through alternative pathways, maintaining full functionality while automatically isolating the overloaded component for repair. Impossible, Corvash whispered, his favorite word from the past few days. There's that word again, Rosa smiled. You know what I think your problem is. You've spent so much time perfecting your engineering that you've forgotten how to innovate. Your ships are masterpieces, sure, but they're static masterpieces. They can't grow, can't learn, can't adapt. But they work. Corvash protested. Imperial vessels have operated flawlessly for millennia. Have they, though? Patricia asked quietly. I mean, they work exactly as designed, performing exactly as expected, doing exactly what they were built to do. But what happens when you encounter something unexpected? Something your designers never planned for? The question struck Corvash like a physical blow. In his 12 centuries of service, he had seen Imperial fleets defeated not by superior technology, but by tactics and situations their rigid design parameters couldn't adapt to handle. Human ships aren't built to work, Rosa continued. They're built to figure out how to work. Every system is designed to adapt, modify, and improve itself based on experience. When we encounter the unexpected, our ships get better at handling it. As if summoned by her words, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Instead of panic, the human crew responded with what looked like excited anticipation. Ooh, what's happening now? Patricia asked, checking her displays. Looks like the cargo bay fabrication unit is trying to invent a new type of alloy, called Tommy from his sensor station. Should we shut it down? Are the safety systems containing it? Rosa asked. Yep, all green on containment. Then let it run. Maybe it'll make something useful. Corvash stared in horror. You're allowing an unsupervised fabrication system to experiment with unknown materials. Sure, Rosa shrugged. Worst case scenario, we get some interesting scrap metal. Best case, we discover something revolutionary. Either way, we learn something new. The tour concluded in what Rosa called the Innovation Lab, a section of the ship dedicated to projects that had no defined purpose beyond seeing what was possible. Human engineers worked on modifications that served no clear function, experimented with combinations of technology that made no logical sense, and pursued ideas that seemed to exist purely for the sake of curiosity. This is Engineer David Park. Rosa introduced a young man who appeared to be building something that looked like a cross between a telescope and a musical instrument. He's working on what he calls synesthetic sensors. What do they do? Corvash asked. I'm not entirely sure yet, David admitted cheerfully. The idea is to create sensor systems that interpret data as patterns of sound, color, and texture instead of just numbers. It might help us detect things that traditional sensors miss. But what's the practical application? David looked genuinely puzzled by the question. Does there need to be one? I mean, maybe it'll be useful, maybe it won't, but won't it be interesting to find out? As they floated back toward the docking bay, Corvash's mind struggled to process everything he had witnessed. The humans had created functional technology that broke every rule of proper engineering, but somehow worked better than systems designed according to principles refined over millennia. I have one final question, he said to Rosa as they reached his shuttle. Why do you build this way? Why not follow established engineering principles that are proven to work? Rosa considered the question seriously before answering. Because established principles only let you build things that have been built before. If you want to build something that's never existed, you need to break the rules and make new ones. She gestured toward the viewport, where dozens of impossible human ships continued their work of turning space debris into functional technology. Every ship out there is unique, built to solve problems we didn't even know we had. They're not perfect, they're not pretty, and they certainly don't follow your empire's engineering standards. But they work, they adapt, and they keep getting better. And that's enough? Corvash asked. That's everything, Rosa replied. See, your empire has spent 3,000 years perfecting the art of building things that work exactly as intended. We've spent 50 years learning to build things that work better than intended. Which approach do you think has more potential? As Corvash's shuttle undocked from Workshop 7 and began its journey back to the Imperial fleet, he found himself staring at readings that continued to make no sense. The human ship was somehow generating 15% more power than when he had arrived. Its systems had reorganized themselves for improved efficiency, and several components appeared to have upgraded their own performance without any direct intervention. For the first time in his 12 centuries of life, Chief Engineer Corvash began to wonder if everything he knew about engineering might be wrong.